All right, we're going to be talking about graphing inequalities for this first video. Okay, so starting right here at the top of our notes, it says use an open circle for a less than sign or a greater than sign. Okay, the next thing, it says use a closed circle for a less than or equal to or greater than or equal to sign. Okay, so when graphing, okay, want to make this completely clear. So when the big mouth, regardless of whether it's greater than or equal to. All right, so this is greater than. This is greater than or equal to. When the big mouth is facing the X, it doesn't matter which way, meaning it could also look like this. When the big mouth is facing the X, you're always going to shade to the right. Always, no matter what. When the big mouth is facing the X, you're always going to shade to the right. Now, the other way. So this would be considered less than when the pointy part is facing the X. This is less than or equal to. All right? And again, it could be the other way as well. It's when the pointy part is facing the X. When the pointy part of the sign or of the inequality sign is facing the X, you're always going to shade left. So I want to make sure that's really clear. Okay? When the big mouth is facing the X, it doesn't matter whether the X is on the left or on the right. You're always going to shade right. Okay? When the pointy part is facing the X, and again, no matter what your answer is, when the pointy part is facing the X, you're always going to shade left. All right? So let's look at number one. According to what we just went over, the pointy part is facing the X, right? So obviously, we're going to shade left. So first thing, okay, we need to plot the number. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. 3. So what you need to know, and I'm also going to give you another set of notes on here for anybody that doesn't have it. An open circle and a closed circle, okay? An open circle is always going to be a less than or greater than sign. A closed circle is always going to be less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. All right? So, doing interval notation. All right? So, when we get to the interval notation part, an open circle is going to be parentheses. A closed circle is going to be brackets. All right? And then, again, when we get to the interval notation part, we're going to have negative infinity and positive infinity that are included in that. Negative infinity is always the left parenthesis. Positive infinity is always the right parenthesis. So just a little bit more notes for anybody that's watching this video. I gave these notes to the people in class. So back to number one. So on number one, we have a less than sign, so this is going to be an open circle at 3. So open circle at 3. The pointy part is facing the X, so we're going to shade left this way. All right, so our graph is actually finished. That was pretty simple. Now, interval notation is always what is the shaded in area from left to right. Always from left to right. So it starts right here on the left, the arrow. That arrow is negative infinity. So remember, when we come back down here on the notes that I just gave you, negative infinity is a left parenthesis. So if that's where we started on our graph, meaning what's shaded in, we're going to put the left parenthesis and negative infinity. Now, where did our graph end? Well, it ended right here, okay, at 3. So I'm going to put a 3 here. Now, we go back to this part right here. Open circle means parenthesis. So I'm going to finish this by putting a parenthesis because what's on the 3 is an open circle. And that would be your notation. All right, let's do another one. So this one right here, okay, we have a greater than sign. So it is an open circle again, and then at -1. So here's -1, and there's my open circle. This time, the big mouth is facing the X, so we're going to shade right. This way. All right, so interval notation. This time, on the left, my graph starts at -1, and it's an open circle. So I'm going to put -1. Open circle means parenthesis, and I'm going to put a comma in the middle. Where does it go to? It goes all the way to the arrow. This arrow is positive infinity. So I'm going to put a positive infinity, and you can go back to the notes that I gave you. Positive infinity is the right parenthesis. So we're going to close it out by putting the right parenthesis. And that would be my notation. So if you look at the graph, what's shaded in, it starts at -1 and it ends at positive infinity. And that's what the notation covers. All right. Number 3. So you can see that this actually has a line underneath the sign. That tells me that it's a closed circle at 7. All right. So closed circle at 7. That would be a closed circle. Big mouth is facing the X. So we're going to shade to the right. This way. Interval notation. So a closed circle, all right, so we're going to start at 7 first of all. So that's what we're going to write down, a 7. And if you look right here at the notes that I gave you, a closed circle is a bracket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bracket here. Now, where does this go? So this is where it started, and this is where it finished. So it finished at the arrow, which again, on the right is positive infinity, which is always a parenthesis. It kind of rhymes, okay? The infinities are always a parenthesis, no matter what, okay? And that would be your interval notation right there. All right, number 4. So on this one, again, we've got a line underneath the sign. So we know it's going to be a closed circle. And it's going to be a closed circle at -5. So let's find -5 on here. And let's put a closed circle on -5. Okay. The pointy part is facing the X. So we know it's going to be shaded to the left. All right. That's according to the notes that I gave you a little bit ago. Anytime the pointy part is facing the X, no matter what side the X is on, it's always going to be shaded left. All right? So now, there's our graph. Now we have to determine the interval notation from left to right. So where do we start on the far left? Well, right here. Remember, this arrow is negative infinity, which is always a parenthesis. All right, where does it end? It ends right here at -5. And closed circle, remember, means bracket. That would be our interval notation. And remember, this is why I gave you these notes right here. This stuff right here that I'm on right now, this is for the interval notation. It's the whole reason why I gave it to you. All right? All right, so what we just did on 1 through 4 is they gave us the inequality. We had to graph it and give the notation. Now on number 5, they're going to give us the graph. We have to write the inequality and give the interval notation. Okay, it's really not that hard. Okay, it's just going backwards on what you just did. So anytime you write the inequality, you're going to write a letter. Okay, I generally just stick with X. That just seems pretty simple. Okay, that's the generic letter that pretty much everybody uses. You can use whatever letter you want in the alphabet. I don't really care. Okay, I generally use X. Most students use X, so I would just use X. All right. Now, remember what I said. Okay, if the arrow is going left, then you know the pointy part is facing the X, like that. Okay? Now, look at your circle. It is an open circle, so you do not need a line underneath your inequality sign. So we leave that as it is. Now, for the number, where is your open circle at? It's at -2. We just wrote the inequality. Now we're going to do the interval notation. So where does our graph start on the far left? It starts at -infinity, which is always a parenthesis. Where does it end on the right? Well, it ends at -2. And an open circle means a parenthesis. And there's our notation. All right? And if you forget which one it is, open circle, parenthesis, closed circle, parenthesis, again, that's why I gave you this right here. This is what it's for. All right? You can see that the open circle has the parentheses, the closed circle has the brackets, and then the infinities are the parentheses. That's why I gave this to you. All right? So number 6. So let's write the inequality first. So first thing, put an X or whatever letter you want. Okay? Now, our graph is going to the right, so we know that the big mouth has to be facing the X. All right? So now let's look at our circle. It is a closed circle, so that means we do need a line underneath, because that means it's greater than or equal to. Now, what number is the closed circle on? It's on 4. So we just wrote the inequality. All right, now we need to do the interval notation. So where does my graph start on the far left? It starts at 4. A closed circle means it's a bracket. Where does it go to on the far right? Well, it goes to the arrow. That would be positive infinity, which is always a parenthesis. There is your interval notation. All right, so number 7, okay? So we're going to start out with a letter. I'm going to stick with X. You see that it's going to the left, so the pointy part is facing the X, okay? Now we see that it's a closed circle, so we do need a line underneath. Where is the closed circle at? It's at 0. Okay? So we just wrote the inequality. All right? So now, on this right here, interval notation, where does this start? It starts at negative infinity, which is always a parenthesis. It kind of rhymes. Okay? Where does this end? It ends at 0. And a closed circle means it's a bracket. That would be your interval notation from negative infinity to 0. All right, last one for this video. Okay, number 8. So on this one right here, we're going to put an X because that's where we're going to start out writing the inequality. And you can see it is going to the right. So big mouth facing the X. It's an open circle, so we do not need a line underneath. Okay, where is the open circle at? It's at negative 3. All right, so we just wrote the inequality right there. Now we need to do the interval notation. Where does my graph start? It starts at negative 3. It's an open circle, so that means parenthesis. Where does it end on the far right? Well, it ends at positive infinity, which is always a parenthesis, and that rhymes. Okay, so starting out, these are the notes for 2-1. Okay, now in 2-1 for big ideas on the assignment, you're basically only going to be plotting the graph. All right, so the interval notation is just I'm getting you used to doing it at the very first of this unit. That way when we get to it, it's not an issue. All right, so hopefully this video helps out, and then I'll have the next video posted soon.